7 wild dogs had formed a tightening circle around the donkey in the middle of a dried riverbed. The donkey was old, maybe 15 years, his gray coat streaked with scars from a lifetime of work. He spun in place, braying desperately, his hooves kicking up clouds of red dust. The alpha female, her spotted coat rippling with muscle, darted forward and snapped at his hind legs. The donkey stumbled back and crashed into another dog, which immediately lunged for his throat. 50 meters away, hidden behind a cluster of acacia trees, Jabari pressed his back against rough bark and watched the attack unfold. His chest tightened. He knew those dogs, the same pack that had been terrorizing livestock for weeks. And he knew that donkey. Old McKenna, who had carried water for his village since Jabari was a child, who had never kicked or bitten anyone, who worked until his legs trembled. The pack moved with coordinated precision. 2 dogs circling left, 3 to the right, 1 blocking the narrow path back to the village, and the alpha waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This wasn't hunting. This was execution. Jabari had no weapon. No gun, no spear, not even a stick thick enough to matter. Just his voice, his body, and a choice that could cost him his life. But as the alpha female crouched low, preparing for the killing lunge, Jabari stepped out from the trees. The morning had started like any other in the village of Kidara, a small community nestled between the Serengeti grasslands and the rocky hills of northern Tanzania. Jabari had woken before sunrise, as he always did, to the sound of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. At 32 years old, he was one of the village's most respected herders, known for his quiet patience and his deep understanding of animal behavior. His people, the Maasai, had lived alongside wild animals for generations. Lions, elephants, buffalo. Jabari had learned to read their movements, to know when to stand firm and when to back away. But wild dogs were different. Unpredictable. Relentless. And in recent weeks, a pack of 7 had been growing bolder, venturing closer to the village, testing boundaries. That morning, Jabari had gone to check on the cattle grazing near the dried riverbed. It was the dry season, and water was scarce. The animals had to venture farther each day to find decent grass. He walked the familiar path, his red shuka cloth wrapped around his shoulders, his walking stick tapping against the hard earth. Old McKenna, the village's communal donkey, had wandered off from the main herd. Jabari spotted him near the riverbed, grazing alone on a patch of stubborn grass. The donkey's ears twitched as Jabari approached, but he didn't look up. McKenna had been with the village for 15 years, longer than some of the children. He had carried water jugs on his back, pulled carts loaded with firewood, and never once refused a burden. Jabari smiled slightly. "You're getting too old to wander off alone, friend," he murmured. Then he heard it. A sound that made his blood run cold. The high-pitched yipping of wild dogs, echoing from the riverbed ahead. ACT2, the impossible moment Jabari froze, his hand tightening around his walking stick. He moved quickly but quietly toward the sound, pressing himself against the trunk of an acacia tree. Through the thorny branches, he saw the scene that would change everything. 7 wild dogs had surrounded McKenna in the center of the dried riverbed. The donkey was trapped, his gray body trembling, his eyes wide with terror. The dogs moved with chilling coordination, ears forward, bodies low, muscles coiled. They weren't barking wildly like domestic dogs. They were silent, focused, deadly. The alpha female, larger than the others with a distinctive black patch over her left eye, feinted toward McKenna's legs. The donkey kicked hard, his hoof missing by inches. But the kick left him off balance, and another dog darted in from behind, teeth snapping at his tail. Jabari's throat went dry. He had seen wild dog kills before. They didn't kill quickly. They tore at legs, at flanks, at soft tissue, until their prey collapsed from blood loss and exhaustion. It could take 10 minutes, 20, and the animal would be conscious for most of it. Every rule Jabari had ever learned screamed at him to stay hidden. Wild dogs were one of Africa's most efficient predators. Once they locked onto prey, they rarely gave up. And a human who interfered? The pack could turn on him in seconds. His walking stick was thin, barely the width of his wrist. Against 7 wild dogs, it was useless. But then McKenna brayed, a sound so desperate, so full of terror that Jabari felt it in his chest like a physical blow. And he thought of the children in his village. The ones who had ridden on McKenna's back when they were learning to walk. The women who depended on him to carry water from the distant well. The old men who patted his neck and fed him scraps from their meals. Jabari's hands were shaking, but his feet were already moving. He stepped out from behind the tree and into the open riverbed. The wild dogs noticed him immediately. 7 heads snapped in his direction, ears pricked forward, eyes narrowing. The alpha female lifted her head and stared directly at Jabari, her lips pulling back to reveal sharp, yellowed teeth. For a moment, everything stopped. The dogs. The donkey. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Jabari did something that defied every survival instinct, every piece of wisdom passed down through generations of his people. He began to walk slowly toward the pack. Not running. Not shouting. Just walking, steady and deliberate, his eyes locked on the alpha female. And he started to sing. The song was old, older than Jabari, older than his father. It was a herding song, one the Maasai had used for centuries to calm cattle during storms, to soothe frightened goats, to communicate across vast distances. Low, rhythmic, almost a chant. The words spoke of earth and sky, of the bond between man and beast, of respect and understanding. Jabari's voice was steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs. The wild dogs shifted uneasily. 2 of the younger ones took a step back, their ears flattening. But the alpha female didn't move. She lowered her head, her muscles tensing, a low growl rumbling from her chest. Jabari kept walking. 5 meters from the circle. For meters. He raised his arms slowly, spreading them wide, making himself appear larger. Still singing. Still moving forward. The alpha barked once, a sharp, warning sound. The other dogs began to circle, trying to flank him. Jabari felt sweat roll down his spine. His mouth was dry, but he didn't stop singing. 3 meters. Old McKenna was behind the pack now, still frozen in place, his sides heaving. Blood dripped from a shallow wound on his hind leg, but he was alive. 2 meters. The alpha female suddenly lunged forward, her teeth snapping just inches from Jabari's knee. He felt the rush of air, smelled the wild, musky scent of her. Every fiber in his body screamed at him to run. But he didn't. Instead, he stopped walking. He stood perfectly still, arms still raised, and he lowered his voice, making the song softer, deeper, more like a rumble than a melody. And then he did something even more impossible. He knelt down. Slowly, carefully, never breaking eye contact with the alpha, Jabari lowered himself to one knee, then both. He made himself smaller, less threatening, but his arms stayed spread, his body still blocking the path to the donkey. The wild dogs went silent. Even the alpha seemed confused, her head tilting slightly, her growl fading to a questioning whine. Jabari reached into the small pouch at his waist, the one he used to carry salt for the cattle. He pulled out a small handful and held it out on his open palm, arm extended. Wild dogs are intelligent. They understand gestures. And they understand when something has shifted from threat to something else. The alpha female took one cautious step forward. Then another. Her nose twitched, scenting the salt, scenting Jabari, trying to make sense of this human who wasn't running, wasn't attacking, wasn't behaving like prey or predator. Behind her, the pack began to shift. 2 of the younger dogs broke formation, trotting a few paces away. A third sat down, panting, its attention already wandering. The alpha stared at Jabari for what felt like an eternity. Her eyes, amber yellow in the harsh sunlight, locked onto his. And then, slowly, she turned her head away. It was the signal. The hunt was over. One by one, the wild dogs began to peel away from the circle. The alpha barked once, a command, and the pack reformed around her. They trotted away from the riverbed, their bodies relaxed now, already searching for easier prey. Within 30 seconds, they had disappeared into the tall grass. Jabari stayed kneeling for a long moment, his entire body trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. His legs felt like water. His hands shook so badly he had to press them against his thighs to steady them. Behind him, he heard the soft shuffle of hooves. Old McKenna limped forward and pressed his nose against Jabari's shoulder, breathing hard, his warm breath tickling Jabari's neck. Jabari reached up and wrapped his arms around the donkey's neck, burying his face in the coarse gray fur. "You're okay," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You're okay, old friend." But as Jabari pulled back and examined the wound on McKenna's leg, his mind kept returning to the moment the alpha had turned away. It wasn't normal wild dog behavior. They didn't give up that easily. Not when they'd already cornered prey. Not when they outnumbered a threat 7-1. That night, back in the village, Jabari sat with the elders around a fire. He told them what had happened, and the old men listened in silence, their faces grave. Finally, Kimathi, the oldest among them, spoke. "Jabari, do you remember the drought 7 years ago?" Jabari nodded slowly. It had been the worst dry season in decades. Cattle had died. Wells had run dry. The village had nearly been abandoned. "You were out searching for water," Kimathi continued, his voice soft. "And you found something else. Do you remember?" And then it came flooding back. 7 years ago, Jabari had been scouting the dried riverbeds, desperate for any sign of groundwater. He'd heard whimpering coming from a rocky crevice. Inside, half buried in sand and too weak to move, was a wild dog pup. Its leg was broken, caught in a crack between 2 stones. Jabari had every reason to leave it. Wild dogs were threats to livestock. Saving one was foolish. But the pup's eyes, wide and terrified, had looked at him with the same desperate plea he'd seen in countless animals over the years. He'd freed the pup's leg, splinted it with sticks and strips from his shuka, and left water and strips of dried meat nearby. He'd returned for 3 days, bringing more water, more food, until the pup was strong enough to stand. On the 4th day, an adult wild dog, a female with a black patch over her left eye, had appeared at the edge of the crevice. She'd watched Jabari warily, but she hadn't attacked. She'd simply waited until he left, then led the pup away. Jabari had never told anyone. It had seemed like a small thing, a moment of compassion in a harsh season. He'd assumed the pup had died soon after. Wild dogs with injured legs rarely survived. But now, 7 years later, Kimathi's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "That female you described today, the alpha with the black patch, that was her, Jabari. That was the mother." And she remembered. 3 days after the incident in the riverbed, Jabari returned to the spot. He brought McKenna with him. The donkey was healing well, his wound already scabbing over. The morning was cool, the sky painted in soft pinks and oranges. Jabari stood at the edge of the riverbed and looked out across the grassland. And then he saw them. The wild dog pack emerged from the tall grass about 30 meters away. 7 dogs, moving in their usual tight formation. The alpha female at the front. Jabari's breath caught. His hand instinctively reached for McKenna's neck, ready to pull the donkey back if needed. But the pack didn't approach aggressively. They simply stopped and sat down in the grass, watching. The alpha female took a few steps forward, separating herself from the pack. She sat down again about 15 meters from Jabari and tilted her head. For a long moment, human and wild dogs simply looked at each other. Jabari slowly lowered himself to one knee, the same position he'd taken 3 days ago. He placed his hand over his heart, a gesture of respect among his people. The alpha female dipped her head once, almost like a bow. Then she stood, turned, and trotted back to her pack. The 7 dogs rose as one and disappeared back into the grassland, their spotted coats blending perfectly with the golden grass. Old McKenna snorted softly and nuzzled Jabari's shoulder. Jabari stood slowly, a strange peace settling over him. The wild didn't forgive easily, and it never forgot. But sometimes, in rare and sacred moments, it remembered kindness. Weeks passed. The wild dog pack continued to roam the area, but they never came near the village livestock again. Farmers spotted them in the distance, hunting antelope and hares, but they gave the village a wide berth. Old McKenna recovered fully. Children still rode on his back, giggling as he plodded patiently along the dusty paths. Women still loaded him with water jugs, and he carried them without complaint. Jabari resumed his duties as a herder, but he was different now. More thoughtful. more aware of the invisible threads connecting all living things. One evening, he stood at the edge of the village and watched the sun set over the grassland. A young boy, maybe 7 years old, came to stand beside him. "Is it true?" the boy asked quietly. "Did you really save the donkey from wild dogs?" Jabari smiled slightly. "I didn't save him alone. The wild dogs chose to let him live." "Why would they do that?" Jabari knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. "Because many years ago, I helped one of them when she needed it. And she remembered. The wild remembers kindness, even when we think it's forgotten." The boy's eyes widened. "So if I'm kind to animals, they'll remember," Jabari said softly. "Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But when it matters most, they'll remember." In the distance, silhouetted against the orange sky, a lone wild dog stood on a hill. It was too far to see clearly, but Jabari knew the black patch over her left eye. She stood there for just a moment, watching the village, and then she turned and disappeared over the ridge. Jabari placed his hand over his heart once more, a silent acknowledgement between two souls who understood each other across the divide of species. Some deaths are never forgotten. And some acts of compassion ripple farther than we can ever imagine. This story isn't just about a man and a donkey, or even about wild dogs. It's about the invisible bonds we create with every choice we make, every moment of compassion we show when no one is watching. Jabari's kindness 7 years ago seemed small, meaningless even. But it saved a life when it mattered most, not just the donkey's life, but potentially his own. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and share a moment when an animal remembered your kindness. Hit like and subscribe for more stories that remind us we're all connected, human and animal alike. Because in the wild and in life, kindness is never wasted. Even the wildest hearts remember the hand that showed them mercy.